Welcome back. This is our last session of the day, and looking forward to hopefully what will be a very engaging discussion, and then we can wrap up and go for our cocktails. So we've started the day with an initial overview of what creating shared value is, and Nestlé Chairman Mr. Peter Brabeck gave us his version of the story about how CSV started. We're now going to begin our last session, which is about defining innovative approaches to inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And we're going to begin first with a discussion between Professor Michael Porter from Harvard Business School and Peter Brabeck, Chairman of Nestlé South Africa, who are on stage already at the moment. So. Thank you again, Peter. Is this thing on? Hello? Okay. Thank you again, Peter, and thank you, Michael, for joining us all the way from Boston. So earlier this morning, we began the conference with Peter sharing his version of the story of what happened in Davos. And we're all here today because of this phrase that both of you came up with. So I'm curious, we've heard Peter's version of the story. Michael, what's your version of the story about how creating shared value all began and, some of the history behind it?
Well, first of all, I endorse Peter's story completely. It was a great story, and I remember those conversations very well. And Peter, personally, as well as Nestlé, has been a true partner in this whole journey that we're on about shared value. I think, but I'd go back a little further than Davos. I would say that if we go back 100 or 150 years, it was kind of instinctive that business engages in the community in which it's operating. There's a lot of classic examples of companies that built hospitals, built the schools, took responsibility for infrastructure, trained people. This was, some years ago, this was sort of the expectation in business. But as we got more sophisticated in business, and as time passed, I think the idea that business has something to do with social issues was sort of lost. And in fact, we had the Milton Friedman era where his famous statement was the social responsibility of business is to maximize profits, period. And any business that even thought about social issues was potentially misusing the shareholders' resources. So there's kind of an intellectual history here, and it's this intellectual history that really provides the context for the sort of dialogue that I and Mark Kramer and Peter and others at Nestlé had, that somehow this was oversimplifying what business really is and what business really does. And it was also under recognizing the biggest opportunities that businesses have had over the years. The business is all about meeting needs at a profit. That's what business does. If there's a need in society or a need among consumers or a need in communities, business's job is to try to meet that need but do it profitably, and the profit part is very important because if you're not profitable, then you're depending on charity or donations, and that constrains what you can do. So if you actually meet a need at a profit, that allows you to scale. That allows you to grow. That allows you to be self-sustaining and self-investing. And so business ultimately, its core function in society is to meet needs, but do it at a profit which allows those needs to be expanded and to grow and to be made, productivity to go up so the cost of meeting the needs goes down. That's the fundamental purpose of business in society. But increasingly, many companies sort of lost sight of the fact that there was a broad context for what needs were. It wasn't just kind of conventional consumer needs in conventional markets. There's lots of other needs as well. In fact, the world is full of needs. Africa is full of needs. And the problem is, how do we find creative and innovative ways to meet those needs? But we got to do it at a profit, because if we don't do it at a profit, we're not really going to be able to solve whatever need it is. We're going to be able to help a few, but not many. And the other thing that happened was that there was a sort of a movement in the NGO community, I think it's fair to say. There was a movement in the NGO community to start holding business more and more accountable for all kinds of things. And of course, Nestlé is not alone. Virtually every significant company in the world has been, held accountable by a variety of organizations for all kinds of things. And because of that movement of being held accountable, many businesses sort of started dealing with social issues in a way that ultimately was more about making charitable donations or, becoming a better citizen in the community, all things that are important, but ultimately this, again, drew business away from the idea that social needs and social issues are really the job of business, because business is being criticized for these very things. And so I think that all this really came together over a number of years, when I think we started to realize, number one, that business's core mission is meeting needs. And wherever you have a social deficit, wherever you have an environmental impact, whenever you have a community weakness, whenever you have an unserved consumer, that's a need. That's a legitimate need for business, even if it's something that we've traditionally thought of as a social need. So that was a first realization that ultimately, if business was going to ultimately play a powerful role in society, it couldn't just meet the same old needs we've been meeting in the past. We had to expand our definition of what's possible. And then I think the other really decisive thing for me in my intellectual history was to realize that in my profession, my academic profession, economics, we had convinced ourselves in economics that there was a trade-off between economic success and social success. We had convinced ourselves that it was in companies' interest to pollute. If they polluted, they could make more money. We had convinced ourselves that there was an antithetical interest between business and society. And therefore, the idea that business was going to deal with a social issue was of course, expensive, because if it costs more to be environmentally high-performing, then business has to spend extra money that it didn't have to spend before to do that. But what we started learning in field after field after field after field is actually there's not a conflict between social interests and business interests. In fact, more often than not, they're synergistic. So what we've learned now about the environment is the biggest, dumbest thing you can do as a company is waste resources. And environmental impacts reflect poor technology. Safety problems in the factory reflect bad management, poor processes, bad training. And actually, if we can have a low environmental impact, we'll be more profitable. If we can reduce accidents, we'll be more profitable. If our workers are better trained, we'll be more profitable. There's no conflict between economic and social. And all these things came together, and we started this dialogue about Nestlé. And Nestlé had this idea of creating shared value literally in the DNA. I mean, it was just right in the DNA. It was just instinctive. They didn't even talk about it. There was always a concern about, well, what do these consumers really need? What does this community, what can we do to help this community to allow it to be a better location for our factory or for whatever we want to do there? And so out of this dialogue that emerged around this issue, this notion of creating shared value was really codified. I think the idea has been around for centuries, but there was no kind of sort of formal, written down sort of body of thinking about this. And that's what I, with Mark Kramer's co-authorship, worked out over the course of a number of years. And the article, of course, was published in 2011. And the rest we can talk about is, as they say, history.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's really fascinating perspective. So essentially you're saying that we're basically going back to our roots. If you look back to the history of business, really as being a healthy and active member of society, and this is really just going back and now one thing that I'm curious about, I did economics for my undergraduate degree.
Right.
When I went to school, this was about 16 years ago now, the textbooks, the economics textbooks still described social impact very much the way you described it, as a non-core activity, something that destroys value and so forth. So they haven't, I'm curious about whether, what proportion of your colleagues still think this way, and when are the textbooks going to be updated to actually reflect this new way of thinking?
Well, I will never forget once I published this very short article in Scientific American, which is a wonderful magazine that many of you know, and it proposed a hypothesis, and it said that actually having strict environmental regulation might actually make a business more competitive. And of course, every single economist with a PhD on the face of the earth, thought or actually told me that we were completely crazy. Okay, that this is the opposite. If we try to, if we put strict regulation in and companies have to meet them, they're going to have to spend more money to meet those regulations, and that's going to raise their costs, and they're going to be less competitive. But the reason I discovered is I wrote this book called Competitive Advantage of Nations, and I found that in countries that had strict environmental regulation, their industries that produce environmental equipment or processes related to the environment were the most competitive in the world. And that's because those, by having high standards and a level playing field, business innovated. Business, made things more productive. They used resources more effectively. They eliminated, waste, and that, we just saw this over and over again. So, the profession views a lot of social issues as subject to what's called externalities. You've all heard that word, externalities. Externality is something where, if business does something, it doesn't bear a cost for pollution or for doing something, in the labor markets, but the society bears a cost, and that societal cost is an externality. And when you have an externality in a societal cost, that means that business will underinvest, if you will make too much profit and underinvest in that area. And what we found is, over and over again, it's more the opposite. That actually there's a lot of externalities that are actually internalities. For example, if you have a poor public school system in your town, and you can't hire decent workers, decent in the sense of skill, what do you have to do as a business? Well, you have to train them yourself, okay? And you have to spend a lot of money, recruiting and remediating and so forth. So actually, lousy schools actually create a cost for business. Lousy roads create a cost for business. And lots of other things like that create a cost for business. So we've had, I think, a deeply flawed conception in economics of what's the boundaries between markets and market failures. And many of the things that economists call market failures actually are areas where actual markets can help solve those problems. So I'm getting a little bit theoretical here. I'm sounding like an economist to myself, which I usually don't try to do. But the point is that it's taken a long time for the literature to start to see more nuance and more texture in many of these issues, and to realize that many of these issues are dynamic. So if you impose an environmental standard right away, the next day cost will go up. But what happens is that if that happens, that companies will innovate, and eventually they'll find a way to reduce that cost, whatever it is. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they may be more efficient after than they were before. But so it takes a long time for these phenomena to play themselves out. In the case of that little article in Scientific American, I think there's now like 300 articles debating that idea. And I'm very pleased to say that the literature is overwhelming. It was right. That if you put businesses in an environment where they're motivated to improve their environmental output, they do. And it actually doesn't cost more ultimately and more often than it costs less. But we have to go through that painful process in a lot of other fields. In the meantime, I think businesses have jumped on the idea of shared value. What this did for business was it gave business in a sense, a rationale, a sense of pride, and a sense of an agenda of what they could do about the community. I think many businesses understood that just doing philanthropic donations wasn't going to make an impact, very much impact. It would help, but it wouldn't make a huge impact. Just being good citizens wasn't going to make an impact. What shared value does is it shows business, look, you can have the biggest impact of all. Because if you can find a way to create products that are reasonably affordable, that have high nutritional content, you're going to do more for helping nutrition than governments will ever be able to do. Okay? So business, I think, business had been bombarded with criticism, and I think business was hungry for a direction in which business could contribute to society, but not the wrong way, not by just making donations, but by actually changing the way business was done, innovating in products, processes, ways of working with employees in every other way. And so I think shared value came at a good moment, and I think that's one of the reasons why it spread so rapidly. But we can talk about that later if you want.
So you're saying that basically the whole concept of creating shared value gave companies permission to actually leverage the tremendous resources and talents and financial resources that they have to have impact on society, and before it had been seen as something that was almost a dirty thing they had to do to cleanse their souls.
Off limits, yeah. They gave them permission and also the possibility that they could make that impact if they thought about their supply chain a little bit differently, if they thought about their customer not as their conventional customer, but a customer who had the same need, but they hadn't equipped their products to solve that need. I'm thinking there, for example, of Nestlé has this concept called popularly positioned products. And, this relates to the bottom of the pyramid idea, but many food companies historically, they sold the same products in lower income countries than they sold in advanced countries. They just didn't sell many of them because they were too expensive.
But it also means that the professors still haven't learned the lesson and the textbooks haven't changed yet.
Yeah, well, the textbooks are still slow to change, and of any profession that's slow, my profession is probably the slowest of all, because people are very skeptical of changing an idea this big. But I think we're starting to see a completely different attitude on the part of many companies. I think we're seeing something that younger employees and the people that graduate from HBS every year get very excited about. I think we've recognized that with all good intentions and lots of resources, government, NGOs, foreign aid have not solved the problems that we have in the society. So we can't just keep doing more of that. We have to go down a different path. I think companies are excited about potentially being part of a solution. So we have a lot of energy right now. And what's also extremely positive is the sort of NGO social entrepreneurship community is starting to start to see that business can be really great partners in changing the world.
Peter, thank you. So Peter, Michael mentioned that when you were having this conversation, it seemed like a complete natural thing for Nestlé. It was part of your DNA. Can you share with us a bit about how that happened? Just going back to when you were founded 150 years ago, how did this whole notion of creating shared value become such a fundamental way of doing business at Nestlé?
Well, I think it has to do with what Michael was mentioning before. 150 years ago, when our company was being created, business was part of society. It didn't have a special situation. And business was created in order to find solutions to societal problems, which were very big and very important. And they were new. They had to do with the Industrial Revolution, with urbanization. You had people who could not create their own food anymore, so they went to the cities, they needed to be fed. You had an infant mortality which was absolutely unimaginable in Switzerland. Out of 1,000 babies born, 174 died. This is double what we have today in the worst of the countries. Okay? So business, what was really doing was looking at those societal problems and trying to find solutions based on scientific research or technologies and things like this. That's the way how Henri Nestlé developed his first product. He was not thinking about a multinational company. He was thinking about the life of the child, which was the neighbor's child, that was dying because it didn't have food, it didn't absorb any food, and when the mother brought it to him, as he was a pharmacist, he developed a product which saved the life of the baby, and with that, he saved the life of millions and millions of babies all over the world. So if you think about it, this concept of creating value, both for society and for the shareholders, was at that time natural, because business was part of society. It happened that over the years, and I would say, and again, Michael mentioned that, I mean, perhaps with the culmination of Milton Friedman, who put business into a completely different category. It was like here, and the rest of the society was there. And there was an alienation between the two things. And suddenly, you had business there, and you had also, let's be quite clear, the financial world didn't help a lot in order to give us a feeling that business was part of society. I mean, the bankers and the things had a behavior which perhaps were not very helpful in this respect in the 80s and the 90s and things like that. So suddenly you had business somewhere here, and you had society there. And society was basically being seen more and more civil society, which was basically the NGOs, which became stronger and stronger. And somehow they started to confront this business and said, look, you have a corporate social responsibility out there. Okay? You are not just Milton Friedman's, just make profit. You also have corporate social responsibility, and they put business on the hook and made it responsible and accountable for this corporate social responsibility. And the response to this thing was, and that's why I said in my speech in the beginning, it was a wrong interpretation and a wrong application of this social responsibility, which at least shocked me, that you could almost, like in the 16th century, by paying, you could get rid of your sins. Okay? So if your sins were very big because you have been deploying, you have been using chemicals, and you were destroying the environment, you paid 1 million. If they were higher, you paid 100 million. And you were, with this, you were basically, that's my corporate social responsibility. And I didn't believe that that was the real thing. The real thing was, as simple as that, bring back business as an integral part of the society. Because it's a society which gives business the license to act. So therefore, you have to become part of society. You have to understand that business will never be and should never be bigger or alienated of the political part of it. Politics is the biggest framework of society, and business is below. Cannot be the other way around. Okay? Because they give us this license in order to act. And at the 80s, at least when I was still very active, we had half of the world where we didn't have a license to work. And it was only in the 90s that we suddenly got the license to work in many other places. So I never forget that this license has to be earned every single day. And the only way you can earn it is by creating value for the society. And as a company, and there comes this overlinking is that you should earn value for the society by what you are doing best. So every company has to think very carefully what they can do best and where they can really optimize, how they can create value also for the society. If they do that well, then all these positive factors that Michael was identifying, they will start to play in your sense, in the sense that you will sell more, you will have lower costs, you're going to have to be even more profitable. That allows you to invest more, to be more innovative, and you got into this positive vicious cycle. And I think one of the reasons why perhaps this doesn't go into these textbooks as fast as perhaps Michael would like or that I would like is something very emotional. If you look at it from a little bit of a distance, before we had creating shared value, there was a feeling that the NGOs had business on the hook. And when Michael published his first article, and he started to explain that there is much more that can be achieved, a lot of people were against his vision of creating shared values because they felt that he was taking us off the hook. Okay? And this is not what a lot of people wanted. They were very happy to see us hanging on the hook of the NGOs. Okay? And then comes a professor and he takes us off the hooks and says, wait a moment, to the NGOs, let's work together. Let's do together. Let's put the problem in the forefront, and by working and by forcing us working together, we will overcome problems. We will be problem solvers and not only being problem causers. That's the reason why it takes a little bit more time, and it takes all the intellectual brilliance of Michael in order to get this concept even more recognized. It's more recognized in the business world than it is recognized in the university world, I would say.
There's a lag. Now, that's really fascinating. So you're saying that it was part of how Nestlé was founded because that was how things were done in those days, and it's actually enabled you over the years to really deliver value. And by doing what you're best able to do, you can really have maximum impact on society by bringing the best that you have to bear to solve society's problems. Now, can you share an example of a decision you had to make at Nestlé where you were trading off, creating value for society versus short-term profits, and where conventional management theory would have told you to make this decision to maximize profits, and you went the other way around, and and how it turned out in the end? I'm just curious about a decision you had to make.
Well, you see, whenever you make an investment, you normally have a financial justification that is being brought to the board of directors in order to get the agreement for this thing. Well, since we have embraced creating shared values in a more conscious manner, the financial justification still exists, but it's now being accompanied by a creating shared value justification. So, yes, this investment is going to have a positive return on invested capital, and so like this, but there will be another paragraph that will say this investment, if we do it in this place, let's suppose in a rural environment in Ivory Coast, is going to create, first of all, so many jobs in the rural environment Secondly, we will have to train those people because there is not sufficient education around it. Thirdly, we will have to make special trainings for mechanics and electricians, which afterwards set up their own small shop and give us service to this. Certainly, this village doesn't have, for example, a wastewater plant. All the wastewater goes straight into the river. We have all factories have a wastewater plant. We will allow them to have the wastewater being treated by us. So it's another. So we are building up the whole argumentation why the investment, for example, in a rural environment, in a developing market, might create more value for society than if we do that, for example, in a city somewhere in Europe. Okay? And this will be valid. So there you have a typical example of where we give a priority to one or to the other.
Wow, that's fascinating. I'm not sure many companies are actually evaluating those two criteria side by side as they're making investment decisions.
Well, we are going in this respect even a step further. You know, a normal, when you go to the shareholder meeting, you get the yearly report of a company. Our normal report has been for 140 years basically a report about our financials. And they are being audited by a financial audited company, one of the big audited companies in the world. Well, since we have embraced creating shared value, we have also established as the same detailed creating shared value or Nestlé Society report. We are reporting about our first commitments that we have. I said this morning, creating shared value is not only an intellectual thing. It is a commitment of a company, clear and loud, which we are spelling out. We have 39 commitments. Members of the executive board, each one is personally responsible for those commitments, for part of those commitments, and we report about it exactly the same manner as we are reporting about our financial results. Very clearly shows you value creation on the side of society and the value creation for our shareholders.
Do you also get auditors for that?
Yes. We also audited exactly the same way. They are not the same auditors. They are different auditors. Yes, it is audited.
Fantastic. I'd like to invite two people to join us on stage for this discussion. Dr. Chris Ogbechi, who's the head of strategy and entrepreneurship department at Lagos Business School in Nigeria, and Ms. Anne Veneman, the former director of UNICEF. Please join us on stage. Now, Chris, in one of your roles, aside from being a professor, we've got two professors on stage now, and both who teach strategy. But aside from you being a professor at Lagos Business School, you're the chairman of Diamond Bank. So you teach competitive strategy and strategy in emerging markets at Lagos Business School. Now, in the classes that you teach, you're molding the current and future leaders of business in Nigeria. And I'm curious about whether you touch on this whole concept of creating shared value as you shape these minds of the future business leaders in Africa and Nigeria.
Thanks, Fred. Let me start from saying that if we synthesize the discussions from this morning, there are certain major challenges we are facing in sub-Saharan Africa. Eradication of poverty, attaining food security, attaining improved health care, youth unemployment, and women inclusion. And these are actually enormous social problems or issues. So for us in Lagos Business School, we realize that in Africa, no business can succeed in the long term if social issues are ignored. And as such, we actually set out to produce future business leaders who are responsible. And that implies issues of business ethics, sustainability, which also encompasses CSV, as mandatory for anybody who goes through the school, either in terms of MBA program or executive program. And we don't restrict this to big businesses. We're also preaching the gospel to SMEs. Not only SMEs, we also realize that when we're talking of the social space, CSV, that NGOs have a significant role to play in terms of making this happen, in terms of execution, also for the business world. And one of the problems we find with many NGOs is lack of adequate capacity. So capacity development for NGOs is also an issue that we have taken up as a way of inculcating this whole concept of social responsible leaders, and CSV is something we also teach across board.
Thank you. You also sit on the boards of a few listed companies in Nigeria. So from what you see in the boardroom, what behaviors are boards engaging in that either encourage or discourage companies from promoting from behaving in a way that actually creates social value?
One of the issues that management of businesses in our own environment face is this short-term approach to performance. And it's as a result of pressure from boards. If we really want to make this part of the DNA of our businesses, we have to, from the board level, reduce the pressure on short-term performance that we put on management. And that means boards have to take a long-term perspective. And one way of ensuring that happens is that boards and management must be partners in strategy development and making CSV embedded in their own strategy. So when boards give less pressure on short terms, then it's easy for management to embrace this. Because many people think that if you have to do it, it's going to cost you money. They don't look at the value side. And as such, for companies that have done it successfully, you find that this is visible at board level, which means the board is actually seriously interested in it. They track performance. And one of the issues is that they also look at business cases for this and put in place social and economic impact assessment as a way of justifying this. Where this is lacking, it tends to be very fuzzy, and people cannot actually realize that there's a lot of benefit in moving ahead with this.
So there needs to be greater alignment between boards and management teams to ensure that companies are actually behaving in ways that create shared value. Now, the other stakeholder, and this question is to you, that management have to account to are investors, right? You've got your board on one hand, you've got investors on the other hand. So, in your experience, what do you think can be done to create greater alignment between what investors are looking for on one hand and the pressure that they're putting on management teams and the activities that companies are doing to actually create shared value?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Excuse me. It's a great question, and I think, I've heard for several years now that two of you do this explanation of creating shared value, and I think this is the best yet. But I just want to take off on one of the things you said as I begin to answer your question, and that is the rest is history, when you talked about your article at laying this out. Because I think that what you have done with this concept is created a movement that is continually evolving. And so, in my view, we've seen, as you say, civil society get more involved. They're beginning to understand the value of creating shared value, how they can begin to look at businesses, how they can work with them differently. We're seeing people talk differently about partnerships. How do you engage in partnerships with civil society, with social businesses. We heard a little bit today about Nestlé's partnership with TechnoServe, which is an NGO, which I think is one of the more illustrative ones in terms of how you really create value for shareholders and value for society. There was a great example at your recent conference on a partnership between Glaxo and Save the Children in coming up with a special medicine for umbilical cords so women wouldn't get infections when they're having babies in relatively unsanitary conditions, and the list goes on and on. But I think the thing that we've seen more recently, I would say in about the last 12 months, is that the investment community is beginning to come to the table on this issue of shared value and of looking at indicators around sustainability and around social value, and realizing that their own investors, the investment community's investors, are starting to ask the questions about what impact their own money is having that they're investing. I think this has really changed the discussion, and it's only beginning now in the last several months. I see it on another board, not the Nestlé board, but another board that I serve on, where they're starting to get the questions about their social impact from the investment community, which is creating then, we have to begin to look at this. There are a number of examples of indices that are also driving some of this, and it's what the investment community often looks at, everything from the Dow Jones Sustainability Index to the FTSE for Good. For food companies, there's a couple of things called the Access to Nutrition, which ranks different food companies. There's the Carbon Disclosure Project. And then, of course, we see NGOs actually getting into the act in ranking companies with things like what Oxfam traditionally has been kind of a name and shame organization, is now creating its own index which ranks food companies. So I think all of this is part of the evolution of what this movement has started, and I think it's all positive, but I think it's continuing to evolve.
Wonderful. So we're actually starting to see some indices that track corporate social, creating shared value that can actually validate what companies are doing. Michael, do you have any reactions to that?
Yeah, I think Ann is exactly right. I'm sorry, Ann is exactly right, and I think the investment community was, was slow. I think the investment community, sort of pound for pound, was the most influenced by Milton Friedman. And their idea was, if anything social is going on here, hold on to your wallet because the company is wasting your money. Okay, so that was kind of the historical view of anything like this. They couldn't discriminate shared value from, supporting the local golf tournament as a charitable donation. But I think the investment community, as Ann has said, is now being held more accountable by the people who are investing in the investors, who are putting their money to work, and they're starting to say, well, wait a minute. Why don't we use the investor as part of the solution rather than being blamed for short term and only looking narrowly at, too little in terms of measuring performance. So we're starting to see the investment community move, and I totally agree with that. We have now quite a bit of money managed through socially responsible investments. But I hesitate to say this, but the investment community is going through some of the teething pains that the economist community has to go through too. I mean, because, see, the typical indicators look at sort of a set of generic environmental measures and a set of other generic measures, like every company had to meet all of those measures. But one of the things about shared value is that actually the way you create shared value is different for every industry. It can even be different depending on how you're positioned within your industry. So shared value, there's no one size fits all. There's no one set of indicators that measure shared value. It depends. It depends on your industry, your strategy, your opportunities. And so the trouble is, if we keep looking for one index, we're going to miss some of the potential here. I think that's a place to start, Ann, but I hope that the investment community over time will go through its own trajectory of learning how to do this better. I will tell you that in all the industries I work in, and I work in a lot of them, through my students and former students, The biggest game changer in every single industry I know is social issues. Nestlé is changing the world in the food industry because they thought of themselves as a health and nutrition company, not a food company. And it was that early realization of this truth and the opportunity to create sort of massive social value but also substantial economic value that's kind of separating Nestlé from a lot of the other food companies that have been viewing this as sort of more of a window dressing thing. So we see in the pharmacy industry in America, CVS, one of our large pharmacy chains, decided that actually they weren't just a convenience store that happened to have a pharmacy. They actually wanted to be deeply involved in health themselves, and so they embarked on a comprehensive strategy to do that, to use their stores to actually deliver certain kinds of services like vaccinations. They're running away with their industry because they made that choice. And they even took a $2 billion hit because they stopped selling tobacco. And they stopped selling tobacco because if they were going to be about health, they had to stand for that in terms of selling the product that we all know, there's no doubt, actually destroys health. So I think that if we could go industry with pharma, we could go industry after industry after industry. And what we'd find is we know how to meet the conventional needs. We know how to compete in the traditional ways. What's new is if we can actually understand how to use our company and our strategy to actually create shared value. That's the differentiator now in business. And I think companies are starting to figure out, and their boards, that if, look, we're just doing what we've always done and trying to squeeze out a little bit better EPS, we're not going to get anywhere. We're not going to separate ourselves from the pack. The separation is going to come from innovation, and that innovation, a lot of it is going to come from all these needs we have in the world, all these environmental needs, all these nutritional needs, all these housing needs, all these water needs. That's where the innovation is really going to pay off, and that's what the shared value movement is hopefully, encouraging. So we got to get the investors on the bus too, because without the investors, we ultimately don't have the same power as if the investment community is pushing in the same direction.
I totally agree, but I also think that we have to bring in here the changing attitudes of the consumer and the worker, particularly driven by the millennials. They now want to work with purpose, so they want to work in a company that has a shared value or a purpose, and they want sustainability. They want to buy with purpose. They want to see that sustainability. So I think we're seeing a different attitude also, which is actually helping to fuel the need to really look at what are you doing, how are you doing it, is it sustainable, and how do we go forward?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I was just chatting with one of the young leaders who goes to my university, and I was saying, you millennials have a bad reputation for not wanting to do work. And he said to me, no, it's not that we don't want to do work. It's just that we don't like the type of work that's being done today. We're looking for different ways of working. So I think you're absolutely right.
If I can take a cue from what Michael said in terms of investors being involved. I shared the board of a bank, it's a mid-sized bank in Nigeria. Late last year, we decided as a board and management to reposition ourselves, to move from a commercial bank to a retail bank. And that meant certain drastic changes. And our focus, one of our major focus, is to meet the needs of the unbanked and underbanked in Nigeria, where over 60% of the population is unbanked. It requires a lot of courage. It's a long-term approach. We might not make money in the near future. But one of the issues that we had to deal with is to agree with the major shareholders. Are you prepared to allow us move in this direction? Because we think we can create value. We're not going to play the game of size, rather the game of value. And two major areas that we're looking at is how can we bring in the unbanked into the banking sector, helping them socially in terms of economic empowerment, but at the same time they are customers and they do business with us. And one of the things we kicked off with earlier this year is to partner with a telecom company to offer a banking product, not money transfer, that is mobile-driven, based, not web-enabled, but rather based on the platform of the company, where they can actually make payment, transfer money. If they need to collect cash, they can go to an agent. And that in itself is also helping them to be able to do a few things, make payments, and we have extended that to look at women inclusion. How can we help small-scale female traders in terms of banking, but also in terms of financial literacy and bringing banking to them? This requires a lot of education, patience, and maybe we are not going to make money this year, but going forward, if we can actually bring a sizable number, then we're also helping to empower them, make them grow, teach them how to do business, make money, and they become our customers.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great case study of an African company that's actually leveraging your core assets to drive, social value, but at the same time deliver value to your investors, and the investors are actually giving you permission to do that. Now, I would like to open it up to questions from the audience, and also let's see what we have on social media. We have some mics, as you know, going around, so questions, comments for the panel. Gentleman over there, can we have the microphones, please? We have a gentleman over there with the blue.
Bonsoir. Je m'appelle Badou Samoulou.
Good evening. Good afternoon. My name is Sabu Samulu, and I'm a chair of a group of farmers from Mali. I congratulate Nestlé for organizing this forum, and I would like to take this opportunity to make an advocacy, because this is a question that it's an issue that I raised back then, many years ago, with Nestlé in Mali. What was that about? I observed, I noted that small children were making daily trips to the shop to buy milk. That was wrapped in newspaper. The milk was being sold and packaged in these paper bags that were not appropriate. So I went to Nestlé to ask them if we could not produce something, make something healthy to avoid children buying milk packaged or wrapped in these inappropriate newspaper bags. Children did that many times a day, small children. And I asked the opinion of nutritionists working within the management of industries, and I was told that the bags of 25 kilos were meant for other uses, but once you open the bag, the 25 kilo bag, you have to use it up at once. So you can imagine when those bags are open in the shop and last for a week, you can imagine the consequences. So I think that Nestlé is security, is working for security, and I believe that within a click, Nestlé can find a solution and create packaging that is appropriate for the needs of the children. Thank you.
Yes, of course. First of all, sorry if this happened somewhere. I cannot imagine because we are not selling nowhere. 25-kilo sacks of milk to a retailer so that afterwards he sells it in cement bags to somebody. I've never seen it in my life, and I'm 50 years with the company, so I'm quite surprised that this should be one of our products. We are more criticized because we are putting those products into very small sachets. And we are famous for this. Michael Porter mentioned this as popularly positioned products, which are exactly made a single portion in a packaging which is sealed, which is absolutely 100% sure. And we are many times criticized, saying that we are selling more packaging than content. But we are doing it exactly for that reason, in order to ensure that there is no hygienic danger to any of our consumers. So I'm very surprised. I think if you give me afterwards the details, we will definitely look at that. But I cannot imagine that's a Nestlé product, frankly speaking, because we do not have products which are in 25-kilo bags of one of our brands. So must be another company. But let's have a look afterwards to see the details.
Thank you. He disagrees. He says it's Nestlé. Question there.
My name is Ofon Udofia, Institute of Export Operations and Management, Nigeria. My question goes to Chris and the chairman of Nestlé. I want to know what effort is Nestlé doing in capacity building for NGOs that work with farmers and for trade support institutions that create market linkage for farmers. Like Chris mentioned that in Lagos Business School, they're trying to build capacities for NGOs who are actually interfacing with the local people, the underserved, the underbanked, as he said. Walk into some banks today, because of desertification, most of the banks only knows how to import round trip for fast profit, as he said. Board members appreciate that because it will increase their shares. But when you want a bank to talk about export, trading from your country to another country, which will bring more foreign currency into your covers, few or more banks don't even have what we call export desk. So I want to find out what Nestlé can do or what they are doing in the interim on creating such value so that it will help the economy in Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, I think first of all we have mentioned, all morning had been mentioned, that in order to make an investment in a country, one of the most important issues is that there is a regulatory framework that allows you to do that. Secondly, there is an educated population, which we are finding more and more. And thirdly, that there are farmers who are willing to work and to invest and to develop in order to have a reliable supply. The last aspect, which is very important, which came through in the morning a little bit, but perhaps not strong enough, was the importance of enlarged markets. And that's what you are referring to about the export. And one of the first things for enlarged market is, again, comes back to regulation. We see that a lot of opportunities are not being taken care because the regulatory environment to bring one product from one country to the next one is so cumbersome. Tariffs are so high in certain cases. Infrastructure is not here. So this is perhaps one of the biggest problems that we have in the inter-country trade in Africa, which is in improvement, but far away from really having an open market. What can we do in capacity building? I said before, capacity building has to start at the farm level because it's important that you have a consistent and high quality raw material supply. I think the different initiatives which have been mentioned, whether it's a cocoa initiative or the coffee initiative or even vegetable initiatives that we have in several places, they are a good example for that. It then comes up to the competitiveness of your technology and your factories, and then afterwards to have good relationships in other markets in order to have a sales force in order that allows you to sell somewhere outside. In all those areas, we build capacity, and sometimes we do it on our own, sometimes we do it together with other NGOs or with other also governmental institutions.
Thank you. Over there. And then over there.
Thank you. My name is Momodou Lamine Faye, and I'm representing the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. And by the way, we have a very strong partnership with Nestlé. And through this partnership, especially in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, there's what you call improved access to water. There's sanitation part of it. And also when it comes to hygiene promotion. This is reaching what we call the communities, and there is evidence, of course, that a lot of improvement has been made in their lives. I have been working closely with international organizations and businesses. I think one of the biggest challenges, as addressed by some of the panelists, is how to link risk reduction to the business itself. Most of the investment that we make, especially at the community level, supporting farmers to produce better and so on, we are not thinking about those shocks that come from time to time. I'll give you a story of Mali. For those of you who are coming from Mali, there's a village called Sirakoro, where there was a lot of support to the farming community. But what we did not do was to support them to face those shocks. For example, flooding or disaster disasters that are affecting them. There was this locust invasion which destroyed all their farms. They were not ready for that. So my proposal to Nestlé is to look beyond just supporting people. Look at the risk reduction part. Build risk reduction into whatever support you provide. And again, invest more in understanding vulnerability. I think most of us talk about resilience. The definition we had today was that we need to build back better. For some of us who work with the Red Cross, we are saying, don't just build back, but build back better. If somebody is poor, then affected by a disaster, you want that person to go back to being poor. I think for me, the message is that we need to build back better. And again, of course, the IFRC, you can access our webpage. There is this 1 billion coalition. Most of the organizations are involved in the 1 billion coalition. This is to make people's lives better, safer, and healthier. And we are ready to engage in more discussions with Nestlé. But thank you very much for the collaboration that we have with the Red Cross. Thanks.
Thank you. Question here.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. My name is Eric Mangi. I come from the African Leadership University. It's in Mauritius, but originally I'm from Kenya. And my question goes to Mr. Porter, as well as Mr. Chris and Anne, actually the whole panelist board. So Mr. Peter said that society is the one that gives license to business to actually operate. And from your point of view, business, or rather Nestlé, already knows from the onset that at the end of the day, it has to deliver shared value to the users or to the consumer. So anyone who's working for Nestlé knows that this is our intention to provide shared value for the customers. And so as a business, Nestlé knows that. But as society, we're not quite sure what you're giving to us, at least for the millennial society. And I'll give, as Mr. Fred asked and Mr. Porter remarked, textbooks aren't changing, so we don't know what shared value is. And when we hear glimpses or bits about shared value, it becomes something auspicious, something that we fancy, like it's something nice to listen to. So at what point, and Mr. Chris, you also said that you deal with capacity building for boards of management, but at what point then does society get to be educated on creating shared value? And because textbooks aren't changing, how do we integrate, like the lady mentioned in the morning, how can perhaps the Ministry of Education then inculcate the creating shared value idea into the whole system, so that as society we're ready to receive what businesses want to offer, which is creating shared value? Thank you.
Michael, do you want to take that one?
Well, it raises some very very powerful and important questions, and I would say that I mean, what I took away from that question, and maybe that reflects what I've been working on lately and some of the things that are going on in America right now, but what I took away is that we've talked a lot about sort of educating businesses and changing the attitude of businesses and giving businesses license and permission to engage in meeting societal, social needs, not just conventional economic needs. And business has been moving, I think, quite rapidly in that direction. I think we've seen more and more partnerships between business and government, business and NGOs, to sort of carry out and execute on shared value ideas. Often you need, there's multiple parts of the best solution, and you might need infrastructure, or that's traditionally the job of government, in order to make a farming community prosperous. You may need a lot of kind of very local capacity building, which again, large companies are not equipped to do. And so an NGO that serves that local need in that local community can be the partner on the capacity building piece. And all those things get pulled together to raise the productivity of farmers and improve their yields, improve their quality, make sure they have ways of financing the inputs they need, like fertilizer. So I think the shared value movement, I think, really started in business. It's spread, I think, to include more stakeholders, as Anne mentioned, and we have many examples we could share. But in a way, the person that hasn't heard the message is the general public. And the general public, in many parts of the world, is in a very restive place. There's a lot of economic insecurity. There's sort of chronic lack of jobs. We talked about that this morning, the need for jobs for youth. There's, people living in very poor conditions. And the general public, I think, has not come to understand some of what we've been discussing, on this panel, in terms of how to think about the role of the various institutions in society and how that works. And so I think we're finding a lot of pressure and a lot of, agitation, if you will, that in a way is very threatening to business. And there's a lot of suspicion of business still around the world. There's suspicion of business in the United States of America. I mean, this is unthinkable. I mean, we were the country where if it was good for business, it was good for America. It was having that vital economy and that dynamic, innovative economy and the great business community was really the crown jewel of our country for so many years. But now we have people questioning the validity of business, the right of businesses to exist, whether a lot of people believe today that profit is taking away from society. They don't understand that profit is what allows you to actually meet needs and scale and grow and create a better standard of living. So we have, I think now, the disconnect is perhaps not universal, but the disconnect with actually the ordinary citizen, if you will, or even more the citizen that's not been doing well in the existing structure, is I think is standing in the way not only of shared value activities in business, but is also, I think, creating challenges for government and other institutions. So I think your point is very well taken. You know, there's been a 30 or 40-year process by which citizens have been taught that business doesn't create shared value. Citizens have heard that business does wrong, or business made this mistake, or this mistake, or caused this issue, or caused that issue. And I think if we're going to ultimately succeed in tackling all these challenges we face in the world, we're going to have to bring the public along. I think how to do that is really, really challenging. And you know, a company like Nestlé can't go out and do commercials about how wonderful business can be for society. So how do we bring the public along, and how do we build this not just into business education, but you know, how do we get our young people to kind of understand how the world works, you know, how the economy works, how prosperity is created, how standard of living actually goes up, and I think there's quite a gap there in terms of insight and awareness. And the more we don't have alignment around these issues, the harder it's going to be for us actually to accelerate some of the progress we're now making. I mean, it's quite a stunning thing that, you know, look at how many people have been drawn out of poverty, you know, over the last decade or two. The amount of progress, the Millennium Development Goals, you know, look at how much progress has been made on these really fundamental societal needs. And much of that progress occurred in this kind of multi-stakeholder effort, with business very much at the table and in some cases leading. So I think we have to bring our thinking at the grassroots level among our citizens to understand these new possibilities, and I think we're not there yet. But
thank you.
Stop there.
And Chris, what are your thoughts about how can we actually take this message to the general public in practical?
Well, I think a forum like this, which has got the most subscribers it's ever had, is one way. But I think your question has a few parts. One is, how do you get it into the curriculum of universities? And I think that's a bit easier than, as you say, getting it out to the consumers themselves. And I think it does go back to this distrust of business versus civil society that, you know, it's kind of been in a historical perspective, this is just, there was a complete distrust of each side, of the other. And I think that's changing so fundamentally. But I think the other thing that's really changing is that people are recognizing that you don't solve poverty with giveaways, you solve it with economic opportunity. And so we see solutions celebrated today in our prize winners of social businesses giving people economic opportunity. And I think as people can, as the general public can connect this, the fact that economic opportunity is what really gives people the ability to get further along in life, to come out of poverty, and that there are solutions that we can work with. The farmers, as we've heard so many examples of today, we can see innovative solutions like we saw in our prize winners. There are so many new businesses that are supplementing the idea that you can now focus in a different way in solving the problems of society. And I think the new businesses are showing that, and I think through shared value, the traditional businesses are showing that. And that more and more people, the more and more that people benefit from this, the more they'll understand how important it is.
Chris? Thanks, Anne.
I come from a country where the government has virtually abdicated responsibility in terms of basic social needs. And as such, society looks upon the business sector to solve all the problems, provide roads, provide water, provide electricity, provide the basic needs of life. And as such, that expectation is there. Unfortunately, business cannot solve all the problems of society or take over the responsibility of government. So more dialogue is needed. But I think we have the responsibility of trying to change the understanding of the young ones of what business is all about and how business should operate. And that comes back to our curriculum in the business schools and in the universities of how we can develop responsible business leaders. But one of the things we're trying to do in our own environment is to get as many companies as possible to embrace this concept of creating shared values. And the more they do it and talk about it, the better the understanding. And one way of talking about it is not through television commercials or hypes, it's actually publishing either CSV reports, they call it sustainability reports, or social reports. The more companies go beyond purely financial reports to providing social reports or CSV reports, then the more the public will get to know about this. And that is one direction. And actually, the stock exchange in Nigeria is trying to make that mandatory for all publicly quoted companies to have social reports along with their financial reports.
Peter, so the question is, Nestlé is doing all this, wonderful work in creating shared value, but your consumers don't necessarily know about it. What ideas do you have, or what is Nestlé already doing to actually, show people the value that you're creating?
Well, first of all, I fully agree. I think the institutional approach to it is that you have report about the activities you're doing. For 140 years, Nestlé was doing things, never talked about it. It was part, perhaps, of our Calvinistic upbringing from Switzerland, that you did the things well, but you didn't talk about what you're doing well. It was part of this cultural background, I would say. Over the last 10 years, we have changed. We are talking now, and as I mentioned before, we created, with the help with Michael and Mark Kramer, the first Creating Shared Value report that we did on an analysis of Latin America, and since then, every single year, we are reporting very transparently back the good things and the things where we can further improve, because you are never perfect in this area. There are always things that you can do better. Like somebody was speaking, build back better, yes. I think it was our colleague from the International Red Cross. So we are clear about that. The other thing is important, that it's not that nobody knows about it. First of all, the 700,000 farmers with whom we are working day in and day out, they know about it. And not only know about it, they also see the positive side of it very clearly. So, I mean, this alone is a huge part. If you multiply this by 6, which is more or less what an average farmer has a family, well, this already gives you 4.2 million people who are benefiting directly from what we are doing. And we are just one of the companies of, I think you have now more than hundreds of companies which have signed up to the Creating Shared Value. So, I mean, it is also something, at the end of the day, the fact also will talk about it. How far you should go and make it a marketing tool, I'm a little bit more cautious about it. Because in the beginning, as I mentioned, Creating Shared Value was suspicious. It was suspicious because it was thought that it's a marketing tool with which a company would greenwash itself. And therefore, I think you have to be very careful when you start to use it as a real marketing tool. So I would say, first of all, behave, do what you are committed to. Secondly, report in an orderly manner, audited manner, so that there is a responsible manner into the thing. Third, convince other people that it's worthwhile being part of, like we are doing in the forums. That's why we have the 7th forum. Those forums are not for Nestlé. Those forums is an incentive to get this concept over into all parts of the world. That's why we are doing them in all parts of the world, to convince, for example, also the local entrepreneurs to be part, to embrace this concept. And more people were embracing and then supporting, of course, Michael, who has his own shared value forums all over the world, and he has, last figure I had was about 48 national shared value communities. I think that was about the last figure we had. So in 48 countries, you already have creating shared value communities. So I think this concept is going to, and one day even the textbooks are going to write about it, you will see.
So we're about to wrap up. We're about almost out of time. And I'm going to ask one last question, and then I'm going to share a story about creating shared value. I hope this mic is on. Is this on? The question I'm going to ask is to you, Michael Porter, and I'm going to give you 60 seconds to answer this question. I'm going to put my timer on. And the question is really as follows. So the theory sounds good. It says, companies that pursue corporate, creating shared value, in theory, will make more money in the long term, they'll last longer, they'll have happier employees and happier customers, right? That's what the theory says, and everyone benefits. As a professor who studies this every day, what is the data actually showing? If you look at, evidence, is there evidence that all of these things actually come true if companies pursue this whole vision of creating shared value? In 60 seconds.
Well, I wish we had systematic scholarly evidence. What we have is thousands and thousands of companies that talk about this. We have thousands of case studies now that have been written up and posted. We have executive education courses that are now proliferating. We have forums all around the world. There's a lot of activity. I think we have a lot of circumstantial evidence, but we can't yet prove the very challenging question you asked. So, hopefully we'll get there.
So there's work still to be done. Well done, and you've got 20 seconds left. Thank you.
Do I get those back later?
No, you don't.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm going to ask Peter to make some closing remarks shortly. But before I do that, I wanted to just share a personal story about creating shared value. We've been talking about this today, about ways in which companies can really integrate the good that they do for society with the work that they do every day. And I personally experienced this recently in the work that I do with the African Leadership University. We set out to get some of our students, as many of them as possible, sponsored by different companies so that they could get a free or reduced cost education. And so we started out talking to different companies and asking them, we're approaching it very much from a supply side. We said, we've got these students, please sponsor them. And it was very much from what we needed as ALU. And we were getting companies to sponsor 4 students, 5 students, begrudgingly. It cost $10,000 per student. So we were having a conversation actually with a Swiss company, Swiss Reinsurance. And they were initially interested in sponsoring 4 of our students to come to the university. But then they said to me, they said, we've got a real problem in the insurance industry. We're struggling to find actuaries and risk managers and underwriters and so forth. So can you actually create a special program for us? And so then I changed my thinking and said, well, what if we create a school of excellence for insurance for you? And we agreed that we would then bring together different players in the insurance industry. And we would get 4 things, we would do 4 things with these companies. Number 1, we would get their technical expertise to help us design specific degrees and curriculums for their needs. Number 2, staff members, executives, and managers from the insurance companies would come and would actually be guest faculty in the School of Insurance. Number 3, every year, our students would spend 4 months in work rotations in the insurance industry. So by the time they graduate, they have 1 year work experience in the industry. And then finally, the insurance companies would sponsor students, and then these students would be obligated to work in insurance industry afterwards. Once we changed that conversation, Swiss Re took their commitment from $40,000 to $1 million. And now, all of a sudden, other insurance companies are coming along, Allianz Insurance, Holland Insurance, Old Mutual, and coming together to actually create this, because it suddenly went from something that was non-core and charity to strategic need, solving a talent problem for them. And now we're doing something similar for a School of Excellence for Agriculture. We're doing a School of Excellence for Supply Chain Management with UPS. And this is just an example of what happens when you change the conversation from charity to actually creating shared value, and where in this case, young people are benefiting, they're getting an education, and the companies are benefiting because they're getting the talent that they need to solve their very difficult problems. So I hope that story will be something that you can take with you today to really see how this notion of creating shared value can really be a completely different way of doing business. And that if the whole world thinks this way, we're going to end up using this powerful force that's in society, which is business, to really drive good.